Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for the launch of the catalog for Healing 2. Here's the catalog, and I'm really happy to have it in my hand. It's a great treat for myself. The title of the celebration for my launch is really not about my performance, but about all these wonderful 9 people I've collected around me. And I'm just so happy that you have all joined in this conversation. The title of this talk is, What is Performance Art for Me? And this is supposed to be a casual conversation. I'm going to sort of give an informal introduction, and then my curator, Adam Fahy-Majeed, will give the formal introductions. Qasim Raza Shaheen, I met many a moons ago in Karachi, in another time, in another place, in a world far, far, far away. And I just remember being enamored with the performative works he showed. And then he continued with his incredible career and has done so much.
Qasim Riza Shaheen is a British visual artist and writer who works across performance, installation, film, photography, and with audience as participants. His work explores various ways of sharing memories and enters the fragile architecture of the space between people. Qasim?
Yes, hello everybody.
Oh,
and thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. Amin, it's a pleasure to be here and be part of this forum. A huge congratulations to you for the book launch and this remarkable body of work and all the collective effort that has been made. Adam, Sara, Jermine, all of you just pulling all of this together. It's been wonderful. I'm just getting to know more about it. And I haven't seen Amin for such a long time, but I'll get to that.
Just as beautiful as always, Qasim.
It's been 20 years. So what is performance art for me? A shape-shifting form that refuses to settle. I think that's really, for me, it's about just embracing that temporality and existing between those spaces that we're all talking about. And I think really that's in a nutshell what it has been for me over the trajectory of my work. But just to take you back, just as Sara did, it's nice to kind of touch base with your roots and where you began. I think for me, it started very privately and in my studio, and I was very interested in apparel and clothes. And this was the late 80s, and in the context of Central St. Martin's, and some of my greatest influences were people like Vivienne Westwood and British designers, and how they were creating a spectacle and theater from apparel and clothes. So that's really where I started, and around the mid-90s, I was sort of discovered by the Institute of Contemporary Arts, the live art department, which was then head by Lois Keaton, and she really kind of kept me under her wing and allowed for that early development and transition from what I was making in terms of installation costumes into the performance of the body and the performance of those materials and that materiality of fashion. I became more and more engrossed by those discussions that were happening at the IC in London. And I remember this pivotal conference on Frantz Fanon, who's a psychiatrist and intellectual from Martinique, and is mostly, talked about within the context of his publications, Black Skin, White Masks, and The Wretched of the Earth. And there was a lot of conversations around the nature and politics of contemporary Black performance within a British context, and also across the pond as well. And I remember being, a part of that whole setup and conference, and meeting with people like Stuart Hall and Homi Bhabha and Bell Hooks, Paul Gilroy, all of these what I would say my intellectual parents in terms of my academic training in cultural studies and visual art. So a lot of my understanding of performance was rooted in academia. From then, I suppose, going back to my first meeting with Amin, so that would have been around 2003. And the reason that I had made that trip to Karachi, to Pakistan, was because throughout the 90s, I was exploring my body and art and like I said, all of these different mediums. I hadn't specifically called myself anything, and I wasn't really medium driven. I was very thematically driven. But there was this idea of a cultural longing to, want to belong. And I think it's not just about my work, but also a whole generation of diasporic artists who wanted to in some way touch base with what they understood as their homeland or the motherland and all of those kind of ideas. And of course, we had only understood ourselves through the colonial project and the empire. So everything that I knew about myself was coming from the V&A and from archives, and they were curated in a particular way. And I wanted to go to make this trip and figure things out myself. And that was, that was quite an experience, and that's where I met Amin. And I remember that space really well, and I met some wonderfully hospitable artists and designers, and from all sort of areas of the creative industry. But what was one of the things that I really that struck me during my time in Pakistan was the relationship that we had to the art market as such, or the commercial aspect of art versus where I was coming from, which was very much at the fringe of the mainstream. And when I started to talk about my art practice, my performance art practice or live art practice in 2003, it was very difficult for people to kind of, people around me at the time to contextualize that or program that. So although there was a lot of intrigue about the work and there was a lot of very healthy discussions about the work, there was no real place for it to be seen or curated or programmed. Of course, I remember being asked to be part of award ceremonies and shows and present maybe a traditional kind of dance. I was also training in Kathak as well, but there was no real space of performance art as I've seen it through all of your conversations and how it's evolved over the decades. So that was quite interesting. So yeah, I think for me it's really been about the thing for me in terms of looking at culture from the diaspora has been that I've never really been Pakistani enough to be, I'm not Pakistani enough in Pakistan and not British enough to be British within mainstream work. So it's interesting how that has kind of affected or influenced my practice purely through programming and how my work is seen. So I think that's kind of what I wanted to throw into the mix in terms of performance art and the political context and the cultural context that emerge from it. But yeah.
Yes, Raza Shaheen, I think, the idea of being outsiders, being away, being not belonging is freedom. And I think, going across my trajectory and all the performance artists I've really come across, there's a certain amount of insanity in all of them. An insanity and a sense of not belonging. We become kind of like Greek choruses to ourselves, to our surroundings, to everything. We comment, and there's this need to put yourself physically out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think developing that self-awareness, having that confidence within your vocabulary and looking at performance art as a potential tool to explore things and not sort of fixing yourself too much is what I feel that over the course of my life I've sort of learned is, that it is all very much in flux. And I do like that messiness that occurs in art practices where you don't know what it is and you don't want to set it in a particular medium. Also thinking about performance outside of the body, extending your body as architecturally, so looking at yourself, the spaces that we abide in as also extensions of ourselves and portraiture, other people that resemble us physically, emotionally, politically, to become an extension of our being. So looking at collective agencies and not just always thinking about performance art and autonomy, but also thinking about the collective voice, which I think with Amin's work and certainly everything that Sara and Amin and all of you as a team have curated is wonderful to be able to see that idea of the collective coming through, which I haven't been back to Pakistan for well over a decade, so I really do miss that. But when I visited in 2003, there wasn't really much of that. And of course, I do remember Amin and how you were, you were constantly trying to explore performance art, even if it was through your jewelry or your links with the fashion world or the catwalk or all of that, those early sort of memories of what you were trying to do, even with your photographic work as well, I think, or the editorial work that was featured in magazines in the late 90s. I think that's really important to acknowledge as well, because we're forgetting where this all started. And it did start from fashion, and it did start from those magazines. And Pakistan, the creativity or the creative kind of explorations were all happening in fashion photography as well. So that's something to sort of remind ourselves of. But yeah, and then following that, I came back to Pakistan in 2007-8. I was invited as a resident artist at the National College of Arts, and then continued to become an associate professor at the National College of Arts, and also worked with Beacon House briefly. So it's been really interesting. I was working with some fantastic, dynamic MA students under Lala Rukh, a fantastic artist and a person. And I think that was a great experience. I think I collaborated with these MA students and created a body of work called Dropping Tears Together, which was shown at Al-Hamra Gallery. And that was a durational work that lasted over a period of time, and a few people were coming in and listening to stories whilst performers were chopping onions and dropping tears and telling their stories about what was happening in Pakistan at the time. So my work has always been very connected to the political landscape, the cultural landscape, of course, gender, queerness, but queerness in a much broader sense in terms of the perspective from which we choose to tell our stories and the permission we give to people to tell their stories.
Brother, you came to Pakistan in 2003, and that was soon, we'd gone through a period of dictatorship and Islamization, and fashion was a very, very young theatrical medium then. It wasn't, formatted, and it gave a lot of freedom for experimentation, and you can to slip in performative works onto the fashion catwalk. And yes, and I just really remember seeing the works that you brought down. I saw stills and videos of the work, of your own work, and I found it extremely inspirational and moving.
Thank you. I'd just like to acknowledge one more thing, which is my training in Kathak and my relationship to Nahid Siddiqui, my Kathak teacher over the last 20 years. I think it's really important for me to say that, because in order to be deconstructive, I felt it was really essential for me to understand what the classical form was, or how we understand the classical. And the classical, as we all know, is also very romanticized and constructed. But I thought that was such a beautiful relationship that I had with Pakistan, and I still continue to have with my teacher, because on the one hand, I was learning this very, very precise form from a particular teacher, and then I was also creating live art, which was completely deconstructive and going against everything that I was learning. So I think that sort of dichotomy was interesting as well in my practice.
Absolutely. Adam?
I think that's Qasim, I think that's really beautifully said on many levels. I think for me, the two particular things resonate. I think the point that you make about Amin's work with fashion and jewelry and the interrelationship that particular young and exciting context provided for an experimentation with the performative for Amin. And I think that is completely spot on. And I would just say the other thing about hybridity, I think that what you said really resonates to the hybrid experience. I thought it was really beautiful.
Yes.